Hi, my name is Amber Victory, and I will be presenting on Chapter 8. The title is Avoidance. So before I start, I'm going to ask you my question so y'all can think about it as I go through my presentation. So my question is, what are things that have happened in your life that you would like to avoid in the future and that you would like to help your children avoid? So the first topic is titled An Ounce of Prevention. Children do not wait for parents' scolding or beating. They do not hope to escape the punishment after it has begun. They hide, run away, give excuses, or beg for forgiveness. Much of our negatively reinforced behavior seems to support the prevention rather than the process ending of life shock. That is the bias for the distinction between escape and avoidance. Successful avoidance keeps shocks away. Lab studies have shown successful avoidance of future shocks to secondary consequences of escaping from shocks that have already been experienced. So going back to children do not wait for the parents to scold or beat them. I think I have personally experienced times where before my parents could scold me, I would, beg for their forgiveness, tell them how sorry I am and that it wouldn't happen again, or that I would try to hide the evidence of me making bad choices, or just hide. So, the next part in this chapter is causes of avoidance. So one experiment that Sideman talked about was a dim light occasionally lit a rat's chamber. The animal would get a brief when it lit the chamber, the animal would get a brief shock after 5 seconds. The light was used as a warning. The shock would be canceled if the rat pressed the lever in time. If the lever pressed in time, the lever would avoid the shock and end the signal. If it fails, the animal would be shocked. Later, the light would appear and the rat would either press the lever or be shocked. The cycle would repeat and repeat. Learning to keep brief shocks away is a longer process than to turn them off. An experienced subject will answer almost every time. Avoidance is more adaptive adjustment to punishment than escape. So going into the future shocks. Laboratory synthesis of avoidance behavior shows that true causes do not lie in the future. We do not learn to press avoidance levers before experiencing shocks. We can learn from rules rather than actual consequences, and the second cause of avoidance lies in the present. We press the lever not because shocks will fail to come, but because we have experienced shocks in the past, and because the lever causes fewer shocks. Making shocks come less often is a form of escape from punishment. Experiences establish relations between conduct and consequences that carry into the present. Avoidance is an outcome of coercion. So, Sideman talks about 2 myths in the book. And myth number 1 is expectancies as causes. When faced with the logical impossibility of control by the future, we often use concepts like expectancy to bring the seeming future control back into the present. So to seek the causes of action in the past and present instead of future is an advance in behavioral analysis. We can state our expectations about the future, and we can sometimes act consistently with those statements. The only way to lessen An example of this is the only way to lessen a child's expectation of pain and discomfort in the pediatrics office is to have the child actually experience a visit without those accompaniments. So if the child thinks, okay, every time I go to the doctor, I'm going to get a shot, take him or her to the doctor and them not get a shot, just for a checkup. We will get nowhere by trying to reduce his expectations without first changing his experience. So going into myth 2, fear and anxiety as causes. These everyday concepts have also found their way into vocabularies of psychology and psychiatry. Instead of pointing to our experience with shocks to account for our acts of avoidance, many psychologists and psychiatrists say it's our internal sources of control. Strong positive or negative reinforcers activate internal processes. Sometimes we do not see external warning signals. When the external warning signal fails to arouse us, we tend even more causes of our actions to feelings rather than the signals that cause both. States of fear and anxiety do not explain how coercion by punishment and negative reinforcement gives rise to avoidance. So we remain in continual state of anxiety, fearful of personal contact and every environmental demand. Because of this, therapy for our depression is likely to concentrate on things to relieve our feelings. Pharmaceutical companies devote huge budgets to the development and clinical testing of antidepressant drugs. Some psychiatrists have become little more than pill pushers, prescribing drugs to help relieve anxiety feelings that accompany depression, and then prescribing additional drugs in hope of canceling out the unwanted and even dangerous effects of the anti-anxiety agents. So I'm not sure about y'all, but I have, been through that where I have taken stuff to help prevent the feeling, so I could avoid the feeling of depression. And it's not, I personally don't think it's worth it. Avoidance, of course, is not always bad. It is often useful. If we are to survive, we have to learn to avoid potentially harmful situations. So children have to learn not to touch a hot stove, step off the sidewalk into the street, skate on thin ice, or go off with strangers. So avoidance without warning signals. Laboratory rat starts out by getting a brief shock every 20 seconds. But there's no signal that tells them when the shock is due. As usual, the animal can use the lever to keep shocks away. Every time it presses the lever, it postpones the next shock it was due to get. So every time it presses the lever, it postpones the shock it's supposed to get. Suppose that once the subject has pressed the lever, no shock can come within 30 seconds. With this arrangement, the animal could keep from getting shocked at all. Pressing the lever permits the subject to adapt successfully, acting in accord with the demands of its environment. It postpones the shocks and reduces their overall frequency. If the subject did anything other than press the lever, shocks would come more often. Once they have learned, they press the lever often enough to only be shocked occasionally. Monkeys can go for days without being shocked, and rarely slowing down enough to get a reminder of the contingency. So, again, this chapter was over avoidance. So, my question to you is, what are things that have happened to you in your life that you've experienced that you would like to avoid in the future, and that you would prefer your children to avoid as well? Something that I have had happen to me is I have two things that I will share with you. I have had a house fire where we have lost almost everything that we had owned. In a way that the way that I avoid that is I try to make sure that everything's unplugged when I leave the house. I try to do a check and make sure that I have, the proper protocols to get out if the house that I'm living in now does catch a fire. And then I also try to save up, if it does happen, I will have some money to make it through. But the way I avoid it the most is to go through the house when I leave and make sure that anything that I've touched from the time I went to bed to the time I wake up and get ready to go to work, that I unplug everything and make sure that if there's anything hot on, I turn it off. So that is the answer to my question. Thank y'all for watching. See you next time.